Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Evan R. Liblit Memorial Scholarship Committee's second Waste on Wednesday seminar. My name is Melissa Young, and I work with the Syracuse University Center for Sustainable Community Solutions. And I'm also on the board of the New York State Association for Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling. There are three of us on NYSTAR's board that are from Long Island. And that also includes Greg Hancock and Ken Armelino, who's your local regional representative. Also, Lisa Ruggiero is the coordinator for NYSTAR and is also from Long Island. The Evan Liblit Scholarship Fund is dedicated to Evan Liblit, who is a highly respected colleague who worked for the EPA, DEC, Town of Babylon, a private recycling company, and taught classes. He wrote the state's first recycling plan and helped to grow the Association of Long Island Recycling Officials. Over the last 22 years, the Liblit Scholarship Fund has provided scholarships to 21 graduate students and 16 undergraduate students. Funds are typically raised at various in-person events. Last year, the committee held the first symposium at Stony Brook to a standing room only crowd to address the recycling crisis. Sponsorships and suggestions for topics are always welcome. Today's meeting is focused on recycling. Specifically, this meeting will focus on what's happening with markets, commodity values, and the things that can be done to improve recycling in Long Island. It will be a panel format. I'll be leading the conversation and directing questions to the panelists. For this call, we have everyone on mute except for the speakers. If you have any questions, please enter them into the chat box. You can address it to everybody, and we will try to get to them. We'll try to get to them at the end of the call. So just to provide a little bit of background to the session, as many of you know, at one point, China had a huge appetite for recyclables. And then in 2017, they announced a ban of more than 20 items from being imported. Additionally, contamination levels were reduced from generally 5% to 0.5%, and there was some confusion around that, as I understand. As a result, the recycling sector suffered to market their materials. Programs across the country and in New York State and Long Island had to make changes. Also, there is a need for quality sorting systems, and essentially all efforts to reduce contamination drove up costs for folks. Manufacturers changed, talks about commitment to use more recycled content. In sum, the value of the market changed, and the situation has not really gotten better for most. To address the situation, the DEC, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, held stakeholder meetings across the state a couple of years back to help engage municipalities in a conversation about what they can do to help, and as well as help municipalities moving forward. And we'll talk more about what came out of those meetings later in the panel. But in general, today we're here to talk about how to make things better, what kind of things we can be focusing on. Joining us today is a panel of experts that will all introduce themselves. Please say your name, where you're from, and just a brief bit about what you do at your job. And we'll start with CJ.
My name is CJ Denardi. I'm a fiber trader with Ekman Recycling. We broker material from interim processors and MRFs, and then we export it to international and domestic markets. I live in Middletown, New Jersey, so I'm not on the island, but I'm very familiar with what goes on the island, and we source material from Long Island.
Thank you, CJ. And next we have Kevin.
Hi, this is Kevin Gershowitz. I'm with Gershow Recycling Corporation. Gershow is a family-owned private business that's been processing Long Island's scrap metal and automobiles, appliances for close to 60 years. We are an end consumer and manufacturer here in Long Island, and we have a vast amount of experience in selling to China and meeting their quality specs as they so rapidly change.
Thank you, Kevin. George?
Hi, I'm George Smilo. I'm Chief Operating Officer at PQ Recycling in Farmingdale. PQ Recycling is a subsidiary of Polyquest Inc. down in the Carolinas, and they are the largest distributor of PET resins in North America. PQ Recycling is only one of approximately 20 PET reclaimers in the entire country. There are 2 in New York State. I've been involved in the recycling business for over 25 years, and I was in the soda business for quite a long time before that. We take in basically the materials that are returned for deposit, specifically the #1 PET bottles, through the New York State and New England deposit systems. Then we turn that into a flake and pellet, and those materials are sold nationwide into people that make new bottles, packaging, film, strapping, and a whole host of other types of polyester articles.
To the panelists on currently, what are the biggest challenges with recycling today? Anyone want to jump in?
So I'll start things off. I might as well. You could attack this question from a million different angles, but I was thinking a lot about it last night. And I think one of the best answers to it may be that people genuinely have to care about recycling in order for it to work. So it seems like recycling right now is almost like a luxury. Given, today, everybody lost power. So when you're cleaning out your fridge and it's hot and you have to get rid of all these items, are you going to take the time to actually dispose of them properly? Or, maybe you throw some things out that shouldn't. Maybe you don't take all the, organic contamination out of some things that you should. And it seems like, until people genuinely buy into the fact that recycling is a good thing for long term, we're not going to necessarily get very far with it. And that's not just from the consumer. It's from the packaging companies making things that, although they say they're 100% recyclable, making sure that there's end markets for them and making sure that that item can be extracted from the waste stream in general in a relatively efficient way. For example, Ziploc bags. The box says 100% recyclable, but when you put that into the overall waste stream, it's very hard to extract. And the overall number of end users for that material is minimal. So if there's no end market, the material is just going to sit, and eventually it's going to probably be marketed as something that it shouldn't be. And overall, it'll be inefficient. And then also with municipalities putting together sort of recycling programs, people do everything generally with the best of intentions. So, for example, pizza boxes, they got sort of, labeled as non-recyclable because of the chance that they had organic contamination in them. However, personally, my family owns a recycling company, and I've been in the recycling industry for quite a long time now, and I personally recycle every pizza box that I get. So municipalities really have to formulate their recycling programs around what the local recycler can handle. So what is technically recyclable in one area may not be recyclable in another area, and it leads to a lot of misinformation that's out there. So if people take the time to actually buy into recycling, learn what is recyclable for their specific recycling program, and then doing their best to follow those guidelines, as well as packaging companies making things that are truly recyclable with end markets and easily extractable from the overall waste stream, I think that's the way forward. Also subsidizing it so that, it's not as expensive would be great too.
Definitely. Thank you, CJ. Meantime, anyone else want to comment on the biggest challenges with recycling today?
Sure. To pick up on Chris's last comment, he mentioned something about subsidizing. I've been in the plastic recycling business for over 25 years. In 1995, there were approximately 60 PET recyclers in the country. Today there are 20. Recycling is a business, so it has to, businesses have to make a profit in order to stay in business. The biggest challenge that I see from the plastics perspective is that typically the recycled plastics are purchased as an alternative to virgin resin. And if virgin resin is, for whatever reason, and it's very volatile, like right now, the PET resin is very low due to oil prices and a lot of other issues, demand for recycled isn't so good, except in a few specific areas. So, and I would think that applies to any other recycling material. So, in other countries, even in Canada, recycling is somewhat subsidized by the government. This country, to my knowledge, it is not. And the economics really is, to my mind, is the biggest challenge. And one other thing, if the economics is good, the demand will go up. If the demand goes up, there will be a natural flow to everyone in the system, whether it's a collector or a processor or purchaser, or even a consumer that brings their recyclables either to a retail outlet or a curbside. There'll be more effort along the whole way if people are making money at it. If they're not, very little interest.
Yeah. Just to also expand on that a little bit, going back to China in 2017. So the blended value of your curbside recycling took a big hit when China pulled out of the market in 2017. So one of the largest commodities that gets recycled is mixed paper. So mixed paper went essentially from just say $100 per ton delivered to the pier to a negative. So that threw off the whole economics behind processing recycled material. Municipalities and other places that were locked into long-term agreements were very apprehensive to renegotiate those agreements because it tilted so far in their favor after that blended value went down that it was very difficult to sort of have things change, and a lot of places went out of business because it could no longer be profitable. Glass, you have to get rid of at a negative. I'm saying from the interim processor's perspective. Glass is a negative, MSW or garbage is a negative, and a lot of times 3 through 7 plastics are a negative. And then when mixed paper, which is pretty much the highest volume that goes through, turned to a negative, it was very hard to recoup your processing costs because you basically were only selling cardboard really as a positive, or news if you were able to produce that grade. So people generally have a misconception that recycling is extremely lucrative for the people who are doing it. But with that recent change in China, it really threw a ripple into the market where now a lot of places, rather than just getting paid for the inbound tons, they're basically taking in the tons at a negative or a charge, and then they're doing a revenue share on the marketing of the material in order with built-in processing costs so that they can remain profitable and continue to process recyclables.
Given the restrictions and new contamination standards associated with commodity sales, how has your processing changed?
Well, it's really changed dramatically since the decline and the issues that we had with China. one of the things that was critical was that we focused on making a much better quality standard product. In doing that, we as processors, and it's just not us, there's a lot of processors on the phone that run very good systems, but really we had to slow those systems down. We had to upgrade those systems, all resulting in a higher per ton cost. So the focus has always been on producing a quality material. However, in 2017, with the worldwide disruption in the marketplace, we saw that some of those standards really started to get very strict, almost to a food grade standard in some cases. And we as operators just needed to make some changes. Again, those changes were either in equipment that were changed. With our partners out in the town of Brookhaven, we invested $7.5 million in a new facility out there to upgrade that facility. And really what we've seen is labor costs have gone up, processing costs have gone up over time as we strive to make a higher quality material. That's been the biggest change.
Thank you, Will. Any of the other panelists want to add to that?
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
So here at Gershow, we've always strove to make the best acceptable product at the time for what the consumer was willing to purchase. It's always been a goal of ours here. So we've always been on an investment crusade of constantly upgrading our equipment to meet the standards of the day. No different than a butcher does or a sweater manufacturer. You can't sell yesterday's sweaters today. You have to come up to standards. And so I think one of the things that people, the general public, fail to recognize is that this is a commodity business. This is not a sweater business. This is a commodity business. And commodities go up and down in value on a daily basis. And the desire of the commodities, the quality of them, changes as well. And the price affects that. And in this business, whether you're handling plastic or paper, or you're handling metal components such as Gershow, the markets are severe. And you have to be able to take advantage of the high points. You got to tighten your belt on the low points. And if you're not constantly reinvesting, if you're not constantly upgrading your equipment, which is one of the problems that occurs on the municipal side. The municipal side sort of treats recycling centers like pizza parlors. You buy an oven and it's good for 40 years. Actually, the pizza gets better as the oven gets older. But that's not working in a manufacturing site, which is what we are. Gershow is a manufacturer. Winter Brothers sortation facility in Brookhaven is a manufacturer. Mr. Smile is a manufacturer. Yeah, we're handling waste items. We're handling what people call garbage. But we are manufacturers. This is our raw material. So we here at Gershow, we never really missed a beat with China. We were constantly always investing to improve our systems, and we're in the middle now of a $22 million upgrade on our metal sortation plant, which we started designing 5 years ago. But prior to that, we had upgraded our existing plants to meet the quality specs of China. You do need to recognize that China put out long-term in advance a notice that it would be changing what it would accept. Those companies, those municipalities that prepared for that, invested in that, whether it's slowing the plant down or adding technology or changing the source of the raw material, were able to go through the China crisis. You didn't like the price of the commodity. Not Gershow didn't like the price of the commodity. We're still able to ship it. So constant reinvestment is needed, and it can't be a reinvestment based upon crisis, because then it's too late. It has to be a reinvestment based on what's the new trend coming.
Thanks, Kevin. I think you've all touched on the next question, but I'll just pose it in case there's anything you want to add. What else is happening with the development of the markets for materials? Anything that hasn't been mentioned yet, specifically about specific material?
So on the fiber side,
go ahead, CJ.
On the fiber side, there is with China pulling out in the past, and it looks like the writing's on the wall that they may be out for waste commodities moving forward in 2021. There has been a lot of foreign investment in domestic mills for paper mills. ACN, who's a large mill group, they recently purchased a mill in West Virginia, which is consuming mixed paper and OCC. They're pulping it, and then they're exporting the pulp that came from it, the roll pulp, rather than the actual raw materials. Not just ACN, there's been a number of different companies investing in domestic paper mills so that they can make a finished product and export that, and it's not classified as a waste product anymore. That and other markets abroad coming online. Indonesia is a huge player right now. There's a lot of other, India has always been fairly consistent, but they're going through their own real economic troubles at the time, so they're not buying to the degree that they once were. But there's always been other markets than China. It's just China was consuming so much of the material that when they pulled out or they changed their specs on what they would import, it sent shockwaves to the rest of the industry, because nobody had to pay that premium anymore to compete with the volume that was taken by China.
Yeah, Melissa, one thing that we've seen is that we've seen the location of markets changed. While all of us used to ship a lot of materials to China, and some of us still do ship a lot smaller amounts, one of the things that's happened is we've had to identify some other markets around the world. We see a lot more material going to Turkey and India if we're shipping. We've also opened up some additional markets domestically. And there's been some movement in terms of fiber mills here in the United States, which has been very helpful. Unfortunately, and if you've ever heard me talk, I say this all the time, if there is no markets, there is no recycling, and glass is a good example of that. We as a processor have struggled with finding markets for glass material. The Glass Recycling Institute realizes it's a problem. The brand manufacturers realize it's an issue, and we really have to work to try to improve or find some of those and develop some of those markets. And I think we even need to focus on developing them here on Long Island. There's all kinds of bottlers, there's all kinds of wineries here that have a demand for glass, but we don't have any local secondary market to take recycled glass and make it into new glass locally. The issue, of course, with glass is that it's very heavy, extremely expensive to transport, and as a result, I think Long Island would really benefit if there was a glass recycler right here on the island. And I think that's something that the state and municipalities, through their business improvement districts and through their industrial development authorities, should really focus on trying to find somebody that can create jobs and also help out us in terms of finding a locally available outlet to recycle glass.
Thanks, Will. And on that note, are there any local markets for any materials on Long Island that anybody is aware of and wants to share?
Well, yeah, of course there's local markets. My company, Gershow, is an end consumer. We are a manufacturer. We take a raw material that most people consider solid waste or called junk, and we produce finished products for steel mills and aluminum foundries and copper refineries to melt. We are a manufacturer. You clearly make the argument that so is what Winters or Jamaica Ash or other people that are running facilities for the municipal side of the recycling. The facility in Brookhaven is a manufacturing facility. It's taking a raw material and turning it into something else of a greater value than when it started. Even if it's a lesser negative value, it's still a greater value. So manufacturing does exist on Long Island. We get confused with the word recycling, because once you're changing the product, whether by physical change, such as shredding or baling, or by sortational change, by aggregating it, it's a part of the manufacturing process. And so we probably should be looking more, instead of saying we're looking for recyclers, we're looking for manufacturers. But we have manufacturing right here, most of it done by private families who've put a lot of money at stake. And that should be recognized of all the people that are on this phone call.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
As a follow-up to that, it's recognized that we need some more manufacturing locally. So what else can we do in Long Island and beyond and throughout New York State to stimulate markets?
Consolidate the school districts, lower property taxes, remove regulation, and a whole list of other items.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Well, let me say something. As far as plastics recycling, which is essentially number one and number two, the entire industry only exists because a number of states back in the 1970s and early 80s instituted deposit laws. Prior to that, there was no such thing, to my knowledge, as post-consumer recycling. It was all post-industrial type of stuff. So once those laws went into effect, it forced the recycling, or to force the collection of used containers, whether they be number one, plastic or some other type. But that kind of spurred the onset of other collectibles like glass and paper and that sort of thing, because prior to these laws, I don't believe that municipal recycling was actually, there wasn't any. It was all trash and all went into the landfill. So I think Kevin makes a good point, and I mentioned that before, that all of us, any of us that are involved in recycling, are doing it as a private individual, private companies, with no help from anyone other than ourselves and our particular industry. And in 2010, for instance, 50% of the collected PET bottles went to China. Today, less than 10% is exported and 90% is processed within the US. So obviously things are happening and people are looking at ways to improve the situation. But still, if there is not a incentive to do it, specifically here on Long Island, it's probably not going to happen.
And I would add to that, you know, it's true that private companies make a big investment. However, partnering up with municipalities is critical. And those municipalities have really done wonderful things. You know, there's people on the call today that have long partnerships. We're very proud of our partnership with the town of Brookhaven. The town of Brookhaven developed a material recovery facility, one of the first ones on Long Island to do so. They partnered up with a company that's changed hands over time, and companies have come in, made investments in that facility. But it was some of these municipalities, the more progressive municipalities, that went in and identified that there was a problem. Yes, they could pick it up, they could get it off of the street, but they realized that they needed to have that secondary processing facilities, those manufacturing plants, as Kevin calls them, and I think rightly so. And those facilities are really what push recycling. I think it's also important that we look at the other end of the recycling process and realize that the brand manufacturers, the brand owners themselves, have a responsibility to create some of that market by demanding that those recyclables be used again in the manufacture of either their packaging or their product. And by doing that, we're going to start to see more and more markets develop. So again, we've proven that we can collect the material. We've proven that we can get together with municipalities and come up with really good systems. We've also shown that the private sector can do it by themselves. Municipalities have shown, like in Islip, where they process materials themselves, that they can do it. The real key is making sure that all that material that we collect has a place to go. If there's no markets, there's no recycling. So we really got to push those brand manufacturers, those brand owners, to start utilizing more recycled material to create that market.
Thanks,
Well,
Will.
that is happening. I
Sorry,
agree.
say that again?
That is happening. There are, at least in the pet field and also in the high density industry, major brand owners, beverage people, food people,
I can't talk.
water distributors all have programs to incorporate recycled material into their new packages. But it's all self-mandated. So there's a limit to it, and it's up to the individual companies to do that. There is really no incentive to do it other than the fact that public pressure is pushing them in that direction. So without somebody with a higher authority, it's limited.
So one thing that we also wanted to touch on is what's new with recycling on Long Island and New York State. And one thing I wanted to mention, as a result of the education outreach stakeholder meetings that the DEC held a couple of years ago, they have been leading a Recycle Right New York campaign to help build awareness around reducing contamination throughout the state and various communities. So as part of that, they were providing communication resources to municipalities across the state. And recently, that campaign, my team has essentially taken on, and we are developing a website with the help of that stakeholder group. So some of you are on that group, some of you may not be. If you're interested, definitely let me know. You'll be helping with branding and content development and beyond to make sure that that website is helpful. But it's similar to what Massachusetts has and Connecticut. We're trying to really unify the message across the state to help reduce contamination. And also, this campaign is part of a new center that the state has been supporting, a new center called the New York State Center for Sustainable Materials Management, that will work on promoting waste prevention and reduction first and foremost, top of the hierarchy, but then also developing more economic markets locally in New York State. That's going to be a big piece of it. It's a 5-year plan. So, as we all know, these things take time. In addition, the Recycle Right New York campaign is part of that, as well as other community outreach and public education. And a big research component on non-recyclable fibrous materials is happening as well at SUNY ESF, who is I'm sorry, I should have said this in the first place, that the center will be housed at SUNY ESF. A lot of other SUNYs will be involved as well, including, and in addition, Syracuse University. So more to come on that, but I just wanted to kind of plug that in there as an effort that's happening statewide to address the market issue. I know, Will, there's something else happening locally here in Long Island that you also wanted to touch on. Oh, sorry, Trey.
I'm sorry, I touched on it earlier, and it's worth mentioning again that infrastructure is such a critical component of this. And out in the town of Brookhaven, the largest recycling facility on Long Island just got rebuilt, and that facility started to process materials about 2 months ago. We've been focusing on the material from the town of Brookhaven, as well as running some other test materials. A great collaborative effort, not only between the town and Winters Brothers, but also with the DEC as well. Everybody working together to try to create more capacity, more infrastructure. I think this is just one example. There's certainly a need for more and more of this. And I know there's been several other advancements throughout some other private processing companies where they've upgraded their facilities to create a much better product to keep the material moving. So very pleased to let you know, and eventually we're going to be publicizing that a little bit more, but it's a great thing for recycling here on Long Island.
Great, thanks, Will. And to the panel, what else can the state do to help improve recycling? What else do you think? Yeah,
I think one of the, I mean, it's just not, you know, we say, what can the state do? I think it's, you know, you got to look at these things holistically and realize that there's a lot that everybody can do. It doesn't matter if you're private sector, public sector. It doesn't matter if you're a town, a state, even a village. Melissa, one of the things you talked about was that real big push towards recycling, right? That education campaign is so critical because it begins with the consumer who's actually making a decision on what goes into the blue bin and what goes into the garbage can. So starting right there, that's important. I think there could also be the development of grants for the creation of additional infrastructure. You know, keep in mind that the state of New York keeps all of those unclaimed nickels that go into the general fund. It's a tremendous amount of money that could be repurposed and spread out to help municipalities in terms of developing additional infrastructure or paying for needed services. I think there should be tax breaks and bonus depreciation for the equipment that we buy so that we can continue to make the investment that's needed. And then most critically is the development of markets and secondary markets. We as an island need to have some type of glass manufacturer here on Long Island. That would solve so many problems. And yes, it's true that there are facilities where we can use that material as a beneficial reuse so that we don't have to use sand when we're doing these big construction projects. But the reality is some of those projects are going to be closing eventually, and they may not be used at the landfill to create drainage blankets and drainage layers around the facility. So we've got to start working now to find those and encourage those to come to Long Island, be headquartered here on Long Island, build the plants here on Long Island so that we can have some of those markets that we desperately need, especially when it comes to glass.
Thank you, Will. What else can municipalities do to improve recycling?
They can take a look at manufacturers who are going to be handling raw materials that are from recycling and try to give better expedited reviews, try to give more green lights so that these facilities can quicken the time frame for building permits and site plan approval. That would be important.
Anyone else want to touch on?
From my perspective, the most important thing that state or even national government can do to enhance and increase recycling of into type of material is to mandate the use of these recycled materials back into products. Without that happening, it's strictly economics. In Europe, there's I think there are movements that there's surcharges on landfilling if in the individual countries, if they're not reaching their recycling percentage mandates and things like that. So government could do a lot.
Okay, and we have a couple more questions and then we're going to take audience questions. in the chat box. So remember to use the chat box if you have a question or comment. And we likely won't get to all of them. We may not. But if we don't, we'll do some follow-up via email. Anything else you want to add about what can or should recyclers in particular do to improve recycling? I think we already covered that, but I just want to post it.
Yeah, I think to recap that, again, there are companies that are constantly doing R&D work, taking a look at the future, trying to stay ahead of the curve. It's expensive to do that. There's a lot of companies, not just Winters Brothers, but many other companies that spend a great deal of money upgrading their equipment on a regular basis, and that does, you know, that putting that capital at risk and investing that capital does drive up the cost of recycling. We have seen recycling rates now, the cost of recycling is more than disposal. But the reality is that's okay. It's still the right thing to do from an environmental standpoint, even if it costs more. Nobody ever said that protecting and enhancing the quality environment is cheap. There's a cost that's associated with it. We as an industry are willing to pay that cost, but the consumer, in turn, has to be able to pay that cost, because at the end of the day, it's the consumer who always pays.
Okay. If you could have 3 wishes to enhance recycling on Long Island, I think some of them have been discussed, but any others you want to share?
So if I had a genie that would grant me 3 wishes, one thing I'd love to have is a glass manufacturer here on Long Island. I think I'd love to have cheaper transportation costs. Keep in mind that when we talk about managing either solid waste or recyclables, there's 2 components. There's the cost of process, the cost of transporting, and focusing on managing transportation costs is critical. Transportation is becoming a much greater part of that equation. It's getting bigger and bigger, and we need to find some alternatives for just trucking this stuff around. And then I think there should also be some real serious legislation in New York State. We've been talking to Assemblyman Engelbright and Senator Kaminsky about some changes and some legislative agendas to look at for 2021 and beyond. I think that we really need to have a strong legislative agenda here on Long Island to push for some of our needs here on Long Island. And I think we're going to do that. And you'll hear these words more and more. You want to start focusing on EPR, or extended producer responsibilities, as I think you're going to see more and more of that throughout New England.
Anyone want to add to that?
I agree with it wholeheartedly.
Okay, and this is the final question I have, or that we had for the panelists. So going back to the education piece, because we all recognize that's really important, what people are putting into their bin. What are some of the biggest myths about recycling that we need to address?
I think one of the biggest things is that just because it is recyclable doesn't necessarily mean it should be recycled in your municipal recycling program, for example. There's countless numbers of examples, even shredded office paper, for example, totally recyclable, relatively high value commodity. But when you put it in, a load of material that's going to go to Brookhaven, for example, that material will likely not be captured, and it'll likely be transferred into like MSW, because the system just can't process it. So just because something is recyclable technically doesn't mean that it will be recycled within your program.
And Melissa, I knew you were going to ask that particular question. If I could just share my screen for just a second, I want to go to and find I just want to put up there a quick slide. Sorry, not that one. Oh, I lost. Can you see that, Melissa?
Yes.
Okay. So these are just some quick slides that in terms of the myth, right? This is something that CJ just mentioned. Everything can be recycled. Well, when there's no markets there is no recycling. Another myth is recycling is free. As I mentioned, today it costs more to recycle than disposal. The economics have been disrupted, but it's still certainly the right thing to do. It is good for the environment. I agree 100% that with this is a reality that recycling is good for the environment. Another myth is that single stream is dead. Not true. Single stream, if you have a system to process single stream, and we're seeing it in many communities, some communities here on Long Island, as well as many communities upstate New York, single stream is alive and well if you have that processing capability to segregate materials. And another myth is that glass is an excellent material that can be and should be recycled. Again, I agree 100% that that's true, but understand that glass does contaminate all of the neighboring recyclables, and it's very hard on processing equipment. There's a right way to recycle glass, and it's not in a curbside program. I think if I was to sum it up, recycling can work, but you got to have all the stakeholders, the municipalities, the recyclers, the brand owners, the consumers, the manufacturers, and our great regulators all working together to come up with it, because it continues to be a moving target. So if anybody wants those myths, I'd be happy to, and the realities, I'd be happy to share them with everybody.
Thanks, Will. So we have a little bit of time to address questions from the audience in the chat box. I know one person in particular has been trying to say something, so I think I can unmute Anthony for a second here to say something, and then I'd like to address some of the questions in the chat box. Okay.
I thank you, Melissa. I just wanted to go back to when you had asked the question, what can the municipalities do? The only probably good answer, as Kevin had said, was with regard to the siting of facilities, the cooperation with regard to zoning, et cetera. But the real thing that they can do, and the local municipalities can't effectuate tax credits or give additional money or bonding or things like that. But what they could do is on the curbside program, they could engage in the meaningful education of the residents. When I ran in one municipality, a Dirty Murph, for about 10 years, we achieved a 12 to 14% recovery rate on all the things that Chris would agree as being recyclable and marketable and valuable, from plastics to metals to fiber. When that same community went to curbside collection, they dropped to less than 5. Now, what was that difference? That difference was community participation. So the education first has to engage the community to find a way to participate. There's a lot of recyclables in the garbage. There really should be in the curbside program, number one. Number two, they have to engage in the people that do engage in the curbside program, not to have them put the garbage or the non-recyclables in. What they have to remember is that for every pound of soiled or non-recyclables that go into that curbside program, the equipment and the men will sacrifice 3 times that worth of good recyclables that cannot be gotten because of the contamination. So by putting it in, it's not, hey, listen, if it's recyclable, it is. If it's not, let it go. By putting it in, you're actually suffering and taking away the recyclability of the other material that's there. So the towns do have a role. I agree with Kevin. They have a governance role with regard to citing and regulating, but they also have that educational role, and they have to be bold. They don't like taking the phone call from the resident when it gets left at the curb, but that's the only way to train them properly, is to do that and to have that will and that fortitude. That was my only comment about a half hour ago. Thank you.
Good point. Excellent point.
So looking at the chat box, we had a question earlier about what specifically, if there was, if there was money available, what processing upgrades would you like to, how would you spend the money? What are the priorities?
Well, we just went through that, and we spent I think if you only have $1 million, you're going to be hard pressed. It requires multi-millions of dollars to do that, and you have to upgrade the entire facility. So what we've seen, and I see Natagosi's on the line, is probably not a better MRF designer in the United States when it comes to building these facilities. But you really got to be willing to spend some major capital dollars on these things. And the biggest is optic sorting has a tremendous amount of promise. But you have to upgrade every component of your system, from the tip floor to the bale storage area and everything in between. These facilities are not cheap, but if I had to spend $1 million, I would probably make sure my eddy current was working, make sure my magnet was working well, and spend that money on a good optical sorting system, which we have in Brookhaven.
Okay, thanks, Will. We had a couple people mention pulverized glass. I'm sorry, I can't remember if anybody touched on that, but is that something that someone can touch on?
Yeah, so when it comes to glass, you really, and glass recycling, you really see two components that are coming in. One is the glass that's coming back in through the redemption center, and glass that's coming back in through a drop-off area. That glass tends to be fairly high quality with little contamination, especially through the buyback centers, and that glass can be recycled. It's a higher quality material, and we tend to be able to find a good outlet for that. It does cost money, and it's very expensive to transport, but fact of the matter is that can be recycled. Once it's gone through a recycling system, there is a contamination issue, but that material can still be pulverized, can still be crushed and used in a variety of products. I think Anthony Core said it best last year at a symposium. He said, all we have to do is make, and he's an attorney, he knows about words. One word change in the procurement rules for the Department of Transportation, say instead of should or can, you just have to change that word to will use this material as a bedding material. So it can definitely be done. We talked about some of the legislative changes. That's a simple procurement change that could be done very, very easily to require that crushed glass be used in road projects and civil projects.
It's also a matter of scale too. So you can find smaller markets for this glass, but a MRF is dealing with thousands of tons. So if you could get rid of a truckload here and there, yes, it's great, but you need a large volume and consistent outlet for it. So that's another problem. Although there are a lot of different outlets, it's hard to find somebody to take it consistently and to scale that you need.
Any other comments from the panelists? So it's 12 o'clock. I don't know about you all, but I feel like we could use another 3 to 10 hours to discuss recycling on Long Island. And maybe there will be opportunities. Actually, there will be. So this is not the end. It's the end of the call today, but it's not the end of the discussion. We should think about ways to continue this conversation. I think what we're going to do with these questions, because there's quite a bit here, and panelists, I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm wondering if perhaps we can save these questions, Caitlin, and address them and then send it back to participants today.
I can definitely save all of them as long as the panelists are willing to commit to helping to answer them.
Absolutely.
I'm happy to help too. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for your patience. Thanks for all of these great comments and questions. I really look forward to having a moment to focus to dive in myself. Thank you to the panelists today, and thank you, Caitlin, for your help. And just thanks everybody for joining in. I know it's been a tough 24 hours, so it's great to see some of you, and look forward to connecting soon.